February 22, 2016. Northern Afghanistan. A Taliban machine gun is dug in behind a thick stone wall, mowing down American Green Berets pinned in a flooded field below. The Taliban have captured their night vision goggles. The strobes meant to save their lives have become targets. 8 men are already wounded. They have minutes. Then the rotors come in low over the ridge. An Apache, what it is about to do over the next 14 hours will save 100 American lives and become one of 4 nights the Angry Hornet turned the Taliban to pink mist. But before you see what that Apache did over the ridge that night, you need to understand why the Taliban punched holes through concrete walls instead of standing behind them. They did all of that because of one machine, and it was already hunting them. The AH-64 Apache is not a helicopter in the way you think of helicopters. It is a flying gun platform with a brain.
Do it again.
When the British Army Air Corps sent 8 Apaches to Helmand Province in April 2006, the senior commanders were nervous. There were politicians complaining about the price tag. 9 months later, those 8 helicopters had fired 9,100 rounds of 30mm cannon, 28 Hellfire missiles, and 65 high-explosive rockets at Taliban fighters. They had been called in to engage targets within 10 meters of friendly troops on the ground. Major Hugh Williams said it plainly to a reporter who asked him about the new aircraft. "We're really impressed. It's a very effective beast." The Taliban had a different word for it. They called it the Zambor, the Angry Hornet. Now you know what was coming over that ridge in Baghlan that night. The first story takes place in a place called D Rahu District, Uruzgan Province, November 2018. Late at night, a team of Green Berets from 7th Special Forces Group is being inserted by helicopter into a remote village. Their target is a senior Taliban leader. The mission is a kill or capture. The ground force commander is Chief Warrant Officer 2 Brandon Faya. He has done this kind of raid before. So have his men. They never make it 10 paces from the aircraft. The first burst of fire comes from a compound less than 50 meters away. The Taliban knew they were coming. The Green Berets go flat, return fire, and start trying to identify where the muzzle flashes are coming from. They are pinned in the open with no cover, and the enemy is everywhere. 5,000 feet above their heads, 2 Apache pilots from the 1st Battalion, 130th Attack Reconnaissance Battalion, tilt their helicopters into the dive. Their names are Captain Stephen Scott and Chief Warrant Officer 4, Eric Carver. Scott and Carver have been listening to the radio chatter. They know the Green Berets are pinned. They know the enemy is danger close. They ask for permission to engage. Permission is granted. What followed is described in their award citations obtained later by the Fayetteville Observer as repeatedly engaging a robust enemy force at close range to friendly forces. That is military language for what actually happened, which is that 2 Apache helicopters came in low over a village in the dark and turned the Taliban firing positions into pink mist hanging in the cold air. The Green Berets walked off that landing zone alive, every one of them. Faya later said it like this: CW4 Carver and Captain Scott risked their lives for us that night in D Rahu District. No medal, no words can describe how grateful we all are. In 2020, Scott and Carver were both awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor. The medal was given for heroism or extraordinary achievement during aerial flight. It is not handed out lightly. There are men in Vietnam who did not get one for less. Faya also said something else, something that gets at the relationship between the men on the ground and the men in the gunship. Pilots and Green Berets have their own languages, he said. We could always count on Carver and Scott to chime in and say, oh yeah, the place you were going to was not safe, but you can count us in. That is the Apache's job. Be there when nobody else can be. Stay until everyone goes home. 8 years earlier than D Rahu, and 400 miles to the north, in a province called Baghlan, the Apache had to do the same job under conditions that were even worse. It is February 22nd, 2016. The temperature is below freezing. The fields outside the village of Niazalah have been intentionally flooded by Taliban fighters to channel the approach into a single narrow corridor. A team of more than 100 American Green Berets, Afghan commandos, and a U.S. Air Force combat controller named Staff Sergeant Keaton Thiam are moving through that corridor at night. They are trying to retake terrain near the Pali Kumri district, where well-equipped insurgents have just cut electrical power to the city of Kabul. At 35 meters from the target compound, the world ends. The Taliban have been waiting in dug and fighting positions. They open up with AK-47s, PKM machine guns, and rocket-propelled grenades all at once. The Americans go to ground. Two teams of friendly troops are pinned by what the after-action narrative would later describe as withering PKM fire, repeatedly impacting within inches of their positions. The fight that follows lasts 14 hours. There is something else the Americans realize quickly, and it is one of the worst details in the entire story. The Taliban have captured night vision goggles. They are using those goggles to see the infrared strobes mounted on top of the American helmets. The strobes are supposed to keep friendly aircraft from accidentally shooting their own men. Tonight they are aim points. In the middle of this, Thiam realizes that 3 of the Afghan commandos are missing. 3 wounded men, lying somewhere out in the dark between him and a Taliban machine gun nest 150 meters away. He calls the Apaches. The narrative accompanying his silver star describes what happens next in dry, flat military language. Thiam coordinates an AH-64 Apache to serve as escort. He leads a small team out of cover under fire toward the machine gun. The Apache stays overhead. Thiam calls in 2 30mm gun runs. The gun runs are danger close. The wounded commandos are recovered. They live. That is one scene in the citation. In real time on the ground, that scene took hours. It involved a man with a radio walking toward a machine gun in the dark, while another man in a helicopter watched through a thermal sight and waited for the cleanest shot. When the trigger was pulled, the M230 fired 10 rounds in less than 1 second. Each round was the size of a small banana. Each one hit with the force of a grenade. This is what it looks like when an Apache earns its keep. The men on the ground are alive because the men in the air did not blink. For his actions that night, Staff Sergeant Keaton Thiam received the Silver Star Medal. He still serves. The pilots' names were not released. Operation Kaili, June 24, 2006. The village is in Panjwai district, 12 miles southwest of Kandahar. 9 Green Berets, 8 other Americans, 48 Afghan soldiers. The mission again is to kill or capture a senior Taliban commander believed to be operating in the area. What they find instead is more than 200 Taliban fighters waiting for them, well armed, well supplied, hardcore. Major Chef Ford, the team's commanding officer, would describe it later on 60 Minutes. And it's like all hell breaks loose, he said. The enemy is firing at all directions at us. They had completely surrounded us and were firing at us with multiple systems. Master Sergeant Tom Mahalik, the team sergeant, leads a small element to a building that they believe is the Taliban command center near a cemetery. The Taliban pull back too fast. It is suspicious. Mahalik realizes what is happening just as it is too late to stop it. The Taliban have been retreating into a pre-built kill zone. Behind the cemetery wall is a heavily fortified machine gun position, and the Green Berets have just walked into its field of fire. Staff Sergeant Matthew Benny, Staff Sergeant Joseph Fewhurst, and the team's translator try to flank the position. Benny is hit in the head. The bullet fractures his skull and shatters his shoulder. Fewhurst is hit by an RPG. The two of them are now lying in the dirt, alive but immobile, while machine gun fire passes inches above their bodies. Benny later finds bullet holes in his canteen and 6 bullet holes in his trousers. None of them touch his skin. The fire is that close. The translator gets on the radio. He can hear the Taliban shouting at him in Pashto. They are telling him that if he treats his teammates and waits for them to come, they will take the Americans alive. They will be forgiven. He keys the mic and asks Brendan O'Connor, the team's senior medical sergeant, for permission to kill the wounded and himself before they are captured. O'Connor tells him no. He says he is coming. Between O'Connor and the wounded men is roughly 90 yards of open ground. It is crossed by a single irrigation ditch. The ditch is 14 inches deep. O'Connor starts the crawl on his stomach. His body armor and ammunition pouches fill with dirt. The dirt lifts him out of the ditch. The Taliban gunner sees movement. The fire shifts to him. Bullets pass within inches of his back. He pulls back. He makes a decision that almost nobody makes voluntarily. He removes his body armor. He leaves it behind. Then he goes back into the ditch with nothing between him and the machine gun but his uniform. It takes him an hour and a half to reach his men. While he is crawling, Master Sergeant Mahalik climbs onto the roof of a nearby building, completely exposed, and single-handedly fights off a wave of Taliban who are trying to overrun O'Connor's position. Mahalik kills several of them. He stops the assault. He is the only reason O'Connor reaches Benny and Furst alive. While O'Connor is dragging Furst back through the ditch, a bullet finds Mahalik on the rooftop. Furst dies of his wounds before O'Connor can reach safety. Benny lives. The team is still surrounded. They are running out of ammunition. Some of the men take a moment to write short notes to their wives and children. They believe they are about to die. That is when the Apaches arrive. The pilots come in low and fast, and they begin tearing the Taliban positions apart with the 30mm gun. The kill zone behind the cemetery becomes the dying zone for the men who built it. Where Taliban fighters had been crouched seconds earlier, there is only pink mist and broken stone. But there are still hundreds of Taliban out there in the dark, and the Green Berets are still surrounded, and the only way out is on foot. 600 meters of open ground in the middle of the night. The Apaches solve this with a single piece of technology that the Taliban cannot see. They turn on their infrared lasers. The lasers are invisible to the naked eye. Through the night vision goggles of the Green Berets, they appear as bright green lines drawn directly across the desert, a line of life. The pilots use the lasers to mark a single safe corridor out of the kill zone. Anything that is not on that line, the Apaches kill. Anything that crosses the line, the Apaches kill. For 600 meters, the Green Berets crawl out of the trap following the lasers, while the gunships overhead absolutely tore apart everything that was not following their lasers. They make it. All of them, except the two they had to leave behind. Black Hawk helicopters pick them up at the extraction point. Brendan O'Connor receives the Distinguished Service Cross, which is the second highest decoration in the United States military, second only to the Medal of Honor. It is only the second one awarded since the Vietnam War. Master Sergeant Tom Mahalik and Staff Sergeant Joseph Furst both received the Silver Star posthumously. ODA 765 becomes the most decorated American Special Forces team for a single battle in the entire Afghanistan war. But there is one more thing they all agree on. Every man who walked out of that field alive. They agree on what would have happened if the Apaches had not come. None of them would have made it home. January 5th, 2012, Nari Siraj District, Helmand Province. A senior Taliban commander has been operating in this area for months. He has been organizing attacks on British patrols. He has been firing on coalition troops from positions the British soldiers cannot quite pin down. They know he is out there. They have been hunting him. They have not been able to catch him. The men trying to find him belong to D Company, 5th Battalion the Rifles. 40 riflemen and a partnered force from the Afghan National Security Forces are conducting a joint operation called Cobra Hunt. The plan is simple. Push out into the Taliban-held area. Disrupt the insurgency. Gather intelligence on the leaders. Provoke a fight if you have to. 2 hours into the operation, the fight comes to them. Taliban fighters open up on the patrol from a concealed position. Among them is the man the British have been hunting. He is firing on the troops himself. He has finally made a mistake. He has finally been seen. A British Army Apache from the Joint Helicopter Force is overhead. The crew has been listening to the radio chatter. The ground commander hands them the target. The pilots take the shot. A single Hellfire missile leaves the rail. It travels at almost 1,000 miles an hour. It crosses the distance between the helicopter and the target in less than 1 second. The man who had been hunting British soldiers is gone. There is no body to recover. There is only the impact crater and the silence that follows. The rifleman on the ground watched it happen. Bombardier Joe Harris was the tactical air controller for D Company that day, the man whose voice was in the Apache pilot's ear when the missile fired. Captain Ben Worley, the fire support team commander, said it differently. An insurgent of this caliber is hard to find, and this has been a decisive blow to the insurgency here. But it was Major Matt Baker, the company commander, who said the line that gets at what the Apache actually does. After the strike, the rest of the Taliban in the area went silent. They stopped firing. They stopped moving. They sat in their positions in shock for 30 minutes. Baker described it on camera afterwards. We clearly took them by surprise, he said. After we hit them with the Apache, they just didn't want to know anymore and were in a state of shock for about 30 minutes. That is the real weapon. Not just the missile, not just the cannon, the shock. The knowledge that wherever the Taliban set up, wherever they hid, whatever wall or compound or tree line they thought would protect them, the angry hornet could find them and erase them in less than a second. For 30 minutes after that hellfire hit, the Taliban in Nar-e-Sarraj district stopped fighting. They sat in the dirt and listened to the rotors above them and waited to see if they would be next. That is what the Apache did to the Taliban for 20 years. There is one more Apache pilot worth mentioning before this is over. His call sign was Big H. His real name was Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex. In his memoir Spare, he said the cockpit cameras recorded every shot he ever fired. He said he did not see them as people in the moment. He said they were chess pieces taken off the board. The line caused a global controversy, but it confirmed what the Taliban already knew. The Apache saw all, remembered all. And the Apache did not miss. The pilots who flew them are mostly home now. The men they saved are home. The Taliban took back Afghanistan in August 2021. The footage is still out there. If you watched all the way to the end, hit the like button, drop a comment about which mission shocked you most, and stay tuned. There are more stories like this coming.